All right, here's a brief video to talk about this fear that people seem to have about inflation. Let's talk about when we should really worry, when we shouldn't worry, what are some of the causes, and what can be done about it. Some of the concerns being money illusion, the anchoring or unanchoring of inflation expectations and what that does, and supply versus demand inflation. So let's start at the beginning. What is inflation? Just a general rise in the price level. In other videos, I describe how the price level or the price index is calculated. But here, let's just talk about you. You're heading to the store really jazzed because you're about to buy some stuff. The prices rise, and now your money feels a little smaller. We might even say that your purchasing power has negatively been affected. And this is a main reason to care about inflation. But maybe all other things are not equal. Don't we also need to know what is happening to people's incomes? Why, yes. That's a pretty big but. So let's talk about this in a sensible way. If prices rise by 8.6%, you may feel that things are not going well, that your purchasing power is dropped by 8.6%. You can buy less stuff. But if your income also rises by 8.6% this year, then you're actually no worse or better off than before. One question is, in the short run especially, do they keep up with inflation? There is some evidence that in the short run, because of wage contracts, because of people feeling poorly about any time their employer cuts their wage, even if prices are falling, makes it so that economists think that wages and prices are kind of sticky. In other words, they don't always move with the rest of prices. In fact, they're especially sticky downwards. More on this later. So we should probably add this. They sometimes don't keep track with inflation. So there could be situations where inflation's rising and wages are not keeping up. And this makes people feel definitely poorer. But we think that in the long run, things will all catch up. As people get hit with higher prices, they will begin to ask their bosses for raises, and wage contracts should respond to the higher prices. Economists have a term for this: money illusion. People find it easier to think in nominal terms than real terms. Get a 10% raise, and yet you're angry that your favorite beer rose in price by 10%. We may even have convenient narratives to justify why we're angry. So in this way, the idea of money illusion can show us why inflation does matter in the real world. It can cause confusion and instability. So how do you try to get out of the money illusion? Well, just always focus on real income or real interest rates or real whatever the thing is. And basically all you do is you take the change in the nominal or the face value of your variable and you subtract out inflation. You're adjusting for inflation, basically. So let's say your nominal income rose by 8.6%. Meanwhile, inflation was also 8.6%. You just subtract the two and you get basically your real income has not changed. It can buy exactly as much as before. And it would be very nice if incomes always kept track with inflation, but that's not the system that we have. So there's a lot to think about with inflation. And still we're talking about the short run effects. Let's talk about this thing called the wage price spiral, which you may have heard about. Basically, the story goes like this. If prices start to rise by quite a bit, we can expect people to start requesting pay increases. Nominal wages should also rise. We know this doesn't happen right away, probably, but in a number of years it will. So then after some time has passed, wages should rise by 10%. Of course, this assumes a lot of things like unions, worker power, etc., all of which has been on the decline in the US for the last 40 years. So if all goes well for the workers, they will get their pay increase. But this means that the producers now see an increase in their cost of production by 10%. So they probably will respond by raising prices further. Remember money illusion. So it should be noted that this can work in reverse as well with falling prices. If you're starting to expect prices to fall and you hold back on purchasing because you're waiting for a lower price in the future, this will cause a decline in spending across the board, decline in sales, layoffs, and this lowers prices. Often, recessions have falling inflation or even deflation because of this reduction in spending. A big finding in macroeconomics is the importance of expectations. Expectations about prices and about just about everything really matter. And it's better if people expect stable prices. So, low inflation, good. High inflation, a little scary and confusing. Deflation, also scary and confusing. And finally, where does inflation come from? Is it the supply side, the demand side? More on this, but for now, cost push inflation is the supply side. When things cost more to supply and firms pass this cost along to consumers, that's a cost push inflation. When oil prices go up, when shipping costs go up, etc. When lumber costs go up, we're having some of that during the pandemic. There's also demand pull inflation. If people have rising incomes or the government puts out stimulus checks to get people back to work, that can cause a lot of more spending, and that pulls up prices from the demand side. So one of the reasons we're seeing higher inflation right now is that we've got both cost push and demand pull inflation happening. Will it go down? Well, that's the million, trillion, quadrillion dollar question.